John, first of all, asking about those police officers, do we know any more about those who were injured last night and how they are today?
Yeah, I've spoken with the Chief Constable and my colleagues from the local federation. There were 20 police officers were injured last night, and as you said, Jane, a couple of them seriously with broken bones. We had another officer who has a collapsed lung. Thankfully, all released from hospital and recovering, but horrendous scenes that we saw. And it's only through sheer luck that the injuries, as bad as they were, weren't more significant.
How hard is it to police these kind of events? Because something that is a peaceful protest can remain a peaceful protest, and you don't want thousands and thousands of police officers deployed there watching people sitting around and then going home. But equally, there's always the potential that it can escalate into something else, isn't there?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And I don't think people realise just that fine balance we try to strike. And obviously, we're in the midst of a pandemic. And whilst there's arguments on both sides of whether people should be able to protest or not, the reality is that large gatherings are, in the current climate, unlawful. So we've got that element. So, yes, if there's a peaceful protest, then we need to manage that as best we can to keep people as safe as they can be and not to look heavy-handed. Because there are critics who will say we should be more intrusive or we should step back a bit more. We can never win very often. But what we saw last night was the peaceful process was, without doubt, it was hijacked by a hardcore minority who were intent on violence, on hatred, on anarchy. And some of the scenes we've seen were absolutely diabolical. I mean, in one situation, we've got an individual who's trying to set fire to a police van with police officers inside. That's not protest, that's attempt murder. Disgraceful scenes. How
difficult is it for the police down there on the ground to separate genuine protesters in these kind of events from the troublemakers?
Well, it's near on impossible, because when there's a flashpoint, when things get heated and people are offering violence, then other people seem to be drawn to that, especially with their camera phones, and we're seeing on the screen now, and they want to record it for prosperity, but they will often get caught up in the violent confrontations. And, you know, anybody, I would have thought, with any common sense would say, if they're seeing something which is extreme levels of violence being displayed towards police officers, then most right-minded people would want to stay well away from that. But that's not what we saw last night. We saw people, agitators, who were not only getting involved in it, but they were actively encouraging it. Really, I've said it before, I'll say it again, disgraceful scenes, and has undermined those very people who may have had a legitimate protest earlier in the day.
And in terms of all those camera phones, of course, the police are also monitoring the protesters down there. We know that there are going to be some images released later today of people that the police want to talk to. Do you think there should be different sentences for those who injure police officers and when they're on the line of duty on their job than just straightforward attacks?
Yes, I mean, the Police Federation's been calling for a long time for there to be meaningful sentences for those who assault police officers. And what we saw last night was serious public order offences, of which the tariffs for sentencing can increase. But the tariffs of sentences for people who assault police officers or any emergency worker are woefully inadequate. We're seeing that part of this bill, ironically, will see an increase from 12 months to 2 years for those who assault an emergency worker. But in situations that we saw last night, there were some serious offences. As I say, attempt murder, serious attempts at GBH. We've got officers with broken bones, collapsed lung. Those individuals responsible should expect to spend a long time in prison. Sadly, our experience is that's not always the case. And you say, Jane, that there's an investigation. There is a large-scale investigation now. And if people left last night's event after indulging in violent scenes and hatred against my colleagues, then they need to sleep with one eye open, because they're going to get very loud knocks on the door over the coming days and weeks, because Avon and Somerset Police will not let this go. It was a serious issue of disorder, and we have to catch as many people as we can who are responsible for it.
Do you think these kind of scenes deter people from joining the police force, will put people off from looking at this as a career?
Well, that's a really interesting point, because we're obviously going through a recruitment campaign at the moment. And before last night's events, but after other protests, I've spoken with parents of individuals who want to join policing, and they're really concerned. And look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Policing is dangerous and it's unpredictable. But it's still a job that many people want to do. But it is tough. And of course, even colleagues who are in policing will be faced with the level of hatred and violence that they did last night. And some of them will question whether that's for them. Because we are human beings at the end of the day. We're not robots. We're human beings. And my fear is if violence like this escalates, if we see a summer that we started to see last year, especially with the lockdown hopefully starting to ease, if we see the violence escalate, then that's of serious concern for policing and for my colleagues.